Okay, so the first request I'm going to talk about is from JF, and they said, what factors or areas of a chart do you explore regarding karma and ancestral influence and past lives? Does the IC and fourth house factor in significantly? Okay, so this is a great request, and it's very timely because we are really working with ancestral karma right now with at the end of this Capricorn transit. So yes, definitely the IC and the fourth house come in for sure. That is the traditional, very stereotypical ancestral part of the chart. Because interestingly, the number 4 is kind of not the most auspicious number. It's not like super unlucky. In certain cultures, it is like a very unlucky number. But when it comes to astrology and tropical astrology specifically, it kind of wavers. It can actually be a very lucky number, or it can be quite unlucky. So it just depends on the way that the planets are transiting. But the IC line, which is the line that separates the third and the fourth house, is what we are held by. It is the foundation of the chart. It is the center of gravity of the chart. So it shows your foundation. It shows what you're coming from. It shows your past. It shows all of the things in life that you are being basically like cradled or held by. So that very much does have to do with ancestry and ancestral karma. So the way that the fourth house in the IC really works with it is sort of the psychic component of it and the water element component of ancestry. So a lot of people will ask questions like, if I have an ancestor that's done something really horrible, will I reap any of the karma from that? It depends. And it depends on like what philosophy you choose to think about when it comes to like incarnation. If you are very into reincarnation, which I do believe in reincarnation, then yes, there can actually be a general theme or a thread that continues through ancestry when it comes to karma. And there are a certain type of people that also are not beholden to the karma of their ancestors in the same way that others are. I've noticed this also, where there will be some people who just like slide right out of that or karmically walk right out of the ancestral karma, and there are others who really choose to face it. And that just kind of depends on what karma we ourselves, I suppose, are incarnating with. But I do see that there's always like a theme, and also especially with professions and with what we dedicate our lives to, that's really important when it comes to ancestry. And the fourth house also deals with what we strive for, based on our experiences, based on what we've been through, how the past motivates us, and also how we strive. A lot of people don't know that about the fourth house, but it's a cardinal house, so it's about linear progressions also. So, for example, if you've had an ancestor that was a warrior or an ancestor that fought in wars, that's really important to know because that has a huge effect. I've noticed especially things like that, like having an ancestry of soldiers or warriors, or having an ancestry of people who have like power or control. Those things are really important to see because they're usually pretty big karmic implications for the genealogy and the descendants in that regard. But regardless of what your ancestors have done, whether they've been, farming people, really look towards the professions of the ancestors or what they've committed a lot of their energy to. I find that has a huge, huge thing. Have they been farmers? Have they been warriors? Have they been merchants? Have they been, whatever they've been, that has a big, big implication. And it's really important actually that we work in tandem with that. So if you've had an ancestor who was a warrior, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to like sign up for the army or something, although you would probably be quite good at it. But it does mean that you probably are going to have a warrior mentality towards most of the things that you take on. So you do have to definitely watch out for making things more into battles than they need to be. And vice versa, you need a challenge at the same time. You need something that's probably physical and challenging. Otherwise, you won't feel fulfilled. If you've had ancestors who are merchants, you probably need to try to own a business. You probably need to do something entrepreneurial, because if you don't, you're going to feel like you're not using your energy right. And that's what I would say the main thing about like ancestry, spirituality, and astrology are, like how those things go hand in hand. is in the ability to relate and connect to the ancestry, because of course we have to take society into account. We have to think about, okay, well, maybe for them that was what they did, but that doesn't really fit into the same place that it used to. Like, for example, being a merchant maybe 5 generations ago has a different context than what being a merchant now is. Being a warrior 5 generations ago has a different context to now. So we have to think about that as well, like what the context of these professions or contributions to energy are. Also, another big thing is how many children ancestors have had too. Do you come from a very fertile ancestry, like where people are having like 5 to 10 kids in every generation? Or do you come from a less producing generation, like a generation who tends to only have like the one child? Or maybe there are a lot of people who don't reproduce. That's really important when considering ancestral karma also. Because, for example, if you come from a family who's like reproduced a lot, it means that you also have a very fertile energy and obviously can reproduce quite easily. Though you have to think about this in more ways than just reproduction, because the force of reproduction is wholesome and it applies to every aspect of life. So people who have had a lot of kids tend to then also be like very electrically energized, and they can, focus in a lot of different places, and basically their fertile energy can apply to many different places in their lives. So if you come from an ancestry like that, you probably need to be eccentric, and you need to be focusing on a lot of things, and you need to be, maybe not too committed to one thing, period. Having a lot of children means you've had to be committed to a lot of different children, and that psychologically passes down. Whereas if you've been in a family, coming from a family line that does not reproduce so much, it's much better to focus on certain things and to maybe not be too hyper focused in 100 different places, because the psychology is kind of meant to focus on like that one child or that one experience. So that's a really interesting train of thought to talk about also. Also, the last thing, because we kind of veered off because we're not so much talking about astrology right now, but we're talking about ancestral karmas, which I think is a really important topic for this time, with Capricorn being so represented. It is one of the signs of ancestry. It's on the axis of ancestry, the Cancer Capricorn axis. So I don't mind kind of, going in many different places with this train of thought, but also really looking at estrangements in ancestral karma is important too. So have there been a lot of estrangements in your ancestry? Have people completely disconnected or estranged one another? Do you have, even like in your family, do you have members who have estranged themselves? I've noticed that has a big implication also. So the reasons behind those estrangements are important to look at, and also what it means is that there is a difficult ancestral karma if there are a lot of estrangements. So we are not always going to be able to solve ancestral karma through estrangement. A lot of people think, okay, if I, get out of these people's lives, or if I estrange myself, then I am going to disconnect from that karma. But that's not true, because blood is blood. And regardless of how we're, going in different places, we still have a certain momentum that is generated. Though, of course, sometimes estrangements are necessary. I'm not saying that it's not good, but it's not something to play with. Estranging yourself from a family member has a very high karmic implication. And it also generates, and of course, sometimes it's warranted. And then the implication is different if it's a warranted estrangement. But we have to really watch out for abandoning anybody, even if they are like a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, someone who might not seem as if it has that big of a deal, like whether or not we are disconnecting, though it does have a very big significance. So definitely beware of doing that unnecessarily, although of course sometimes it is essential to do for some people in certain situations. But again, looking up the genealogy, and this is where it's really good to have had ancestors who passed down stories. If you haven't had that, that's also, difficult. So understanding what the context of a household was, having grandparents who passed down stories. Was it a humorous context story? Was it a tragic context story? Was it a religious context story? All of those things are important to consider in understanding your family karma. So for those of you who still have grandparents who are living, or even parents who are living, try to strike up these conversations and pay attention to how they describe their past, or how they describe their childhoods or their time of growing up, because within that tone, lies a lot of the ancestral karma, and you can really extract a lot of that and understand what your own ancestral karmic experience might be. So, what is the best is like humorous family concepts, constructs. What am I trying to say? Stories that are passed down in funny ways are signs of really good ancestral karma. Tragic stories or stories of like death or stories of disease, stories of some type of loss are exactly that, are signs of a karmic ancestral energy that is provoking those things for learning material. And also like religious stories, so stories of, experiences of church or experiences with God, whatever, mean that there is like a religious type of karma, because this is something that we don't consider as much in this century or in this millennium, I guess. This new one, as we've gone into the 21st century, is the impact of religions and the impact that they've had on our ancestry over the last few thousand years. That's had a big impact karmically. And we're already kind of not moving out of that, but we don't consider it, but it's still very impactful on those of us who are here now. So that's really good to have conversations about, what role did the church play in our ancestry? If you're having those conversations with your ancestors, was it an essential center point? Was it kind of an exterior focus? Was it, what role did it play in the household? Like things like that have big significance also. And yes, materials. So like financial circumstances of your ancestors, what class did they fall in has a big significance. What type of house did they have? Did they own property? Did they not own property? Did they work? Did they not work? Did they create their own food? Did they have their own like cows or chickens, and or did they get food from elsewhere? All of these factors are very important in understanding our own karma and what we need to try to be doing ourselves, because following the ancestral momentum makes life a lot easier. Okay, and we don't want to do that in every way. Of course, our ancestors. So we're meant to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors while continuing what is good. That is one of the best ways to be karmically sound, is to fix the errors of the ancestors while learning and continuing what they did well. Because it's always both. It's always both. And for those of us who try to completely derail ourselves from the ancestry and not also take the good lessons, it makes things very difficult.